The sound of shattering glass jolted me from my daydream. I stared at the broken vase on the marble floor, water and lilies scattered around my feet. My hands trembled as I bent to clean up the mess, my mind racing with the conversation I'd overheard just moments ago. "Rodney, darling," I'd cooed into the phone earlier. "I was thinking we could have a nice dinner tonight. I'll make your favorite." "Not tonight, Jenna." He'd cut me off. His voice clipped. "I've got a late meeting. Don't wait up." I'd frowned, about to protest when I heard a woman's muffled laughter in the background. My blood ran cold as Rodney quickly ended the call. Now, as I swept up the broken pieces of porcelain, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling in my gut. After giving up my high-powered career to be the perfect wife Rodney wanted, was this how he repaid me? The doorbell rang, startling me from my spiraling thoughts. I wiped my hands on my apron and hurried to answer it. "Mom?" I blinked in surprise at the sight of my mother, Amelia, standing on the porch. She raised an eyebrow. "Well, aren't you going to invite me in?" I stepped aside, allowing her to sweep past me into the foyer. Her sharp eyes took in the shattered vase and my disheveled appearance. "What's wrong, Jenna?" she asked, her tone softening. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated, unsure how to voice my suspicions. It's Rodney," I finally managed. "I think he might be—" The words caught in my throat, but Mom's eyes narrowed in understanding. "Cheating?" she finished for me. I nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Mom's lips thinned into a hard line. "That bastard," she muttered. "I never liked him, you know. Always thought he was too slick for his own good." "Mom," I protested weakly, "we don't know for sure." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "A woman knows these things, Jenna. You're not stupid. What did you hear?" I recounted the phone call, my suspicions growing with each word. Mom listened intently, her expression darkening. "Well," she said when I finished, "there's only one thing to do now." "What's that?" I asked, dreading her answer. "We catch him red-handed," she declared, a glint of determination in her eye. "No son-in-law of mine is going to make a fool of my daughter." I felt a flicker of hope at her words. "But how?" Mom's smile was positively wicked. "Leave that to me, dear. I didn't spend 40 years married to your father without learning a thing or two about men and their indiscretions." Just then my phone buzzed with a text from Rodney. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." I showed it to Mom, my heart sinking. She read it quickly, then looked up at me with fire in her eyes. "Perfect," she said. "We start tonight." As we began to plot, I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. Was I really ready to uncover the truth about my marriage? And if Rodney was cheating, what would I do? The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted our scheming. Mom and I exchanged a panicked look. "Rodney's home early," I whispered. Mom squeezed my hand. "Remember, act natural. We'll figure this out together." As the key turned in the lock, I took a deep breath and plastered on a smile. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. My life was about to change forever. I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel. My nerves frayed as I pulled into the parking lot of Hawkeye Investigations. The neon sign flickered ominously in the twilight, matching the churning in my stomach. "You're doing the right thing, Jenna," I muttered to myself, gathering the courage to step out of the car. The bell above the door jingled as I entered the dingy office. A grizzled man with a 5 o'clock shadow looked up from his desk, eyeing me warily. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I swallowed hard. I need to hire a private investigator." He gestured to the chair across from him. As I sat, he introduced himself as Frank Hawkins. "So what seems to be the problem?" he asked, leaning back in his creaky chair. I took a deep breath. "I think my husband is cheating on me." Frank's expression didn't change as he pulled out a notepad. "Tell me everything." As I recounted the suspicious phone calls, late nights at the office, and the woman's laughter I'd overheard, Frank jotted down notes. When I finished, he looked up at me with a grim expression. "I'll take the case, Mrs. Lane, but I have to warn you, you might not like what I find." I nodded, my throat tight. I need to know the truth. After discussing rates and logistics, I left the office feeling both relieved and terrified. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a text from Rodney. "Great news. Found the perfect house. Can't wait to show you tomorrow." My heart sank. How could he be planning our future while potentially destroying our marriage? The next day, Rodney practically bounced with excitement as we pulled up to a charming 2-story home in an up-and-coming neighborhood. "What do you think?" he asked, grinning like a schoolboy. I forced a smile. "It's lovely, dear." As we toured the house, Rodney rattled off its features: gleaming hardwood floors, a gourmet kitchen, a spacious master suite. But all I could think about was whether he planned to bring his mistress here. "We could start a family in this house," Rodney said softly, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I stiffened, guilt and anger warring inside me. "About that," I began, turning to face him, "I think we should see a fertility specialist before we make any big decisions." Rodney's brow furrowed. "Why? We're both young and healthy." It's been a while, and nothing's happened," I explained, hating the lie but needing answers. "I want to make sure everything's okay." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, if it'll make you feel better." As we left the house, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Frank. "Got some preliminary info. Meet tomorrow?" My stomach clenched. "Everything okay?" Rodney asked, noticing my expression. I plastered on a smile. "Just Mom checking in. So about this house." We spent the drive home discussing finances, with Rodney assuring me we could afford it with the savings I'd been squirreling away. Little did he know, those savings might soon become my lifeline. That night, as Rodney slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake, my mind racing. What would Frank's investigation reveal? And if Rodney was cheating, could I really go through with buying this house, knowing our marriage was built on lies? Just before dawn, I made a decision. I'd go through with the house purchase. It was a solid investment, affair or no affair. But I'd also start preparing for the worst. As the first rays of sunlight peeked through the curtains, I slipped out of bed and headed to the home office. It was time to dust off my old resume and see what opportunities might be out there for an ex-corporate powerhouse turned housewife. Whatever happened next, I'd be ready. Rodney Lane might think he held all the cards, but he was about to learn that his perfect little housewife had a few tricks up her sleeve. The sterile smell of the fertility clinic made my stomach churn as Rodney and I sat in uncomfortable silence, waiting for Dr. Patel to return with our test results. I glanced at Rodney, noticing the sheen of sweat on his forehead. Was it nerves about the results or guilt over his suspected affair? "Mr. and Mrs. Lane?" Dr. Patel's voice startled us both. She entered, a somber expression on her face. My heart plummeted. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news," she began, her voice gentle. "Based on our tests, it appears that conceiving naturally will be extremely challenging for you." I felt the air leave my lungs. Despite my suspicions about Rodney, a part of me had still dreamed of having a family with him. "What's the issue?" Rodney asked, his voice strained. Dr. Patel hesitated, then looked directly at Rodney. "The problem lies with you, Mr. Lane. Your sperm count is extremely low and motility is poor. It's highly unlikely you'll be able to father children without significant medical intervention." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Rodney's face crumple, a mix of shock and devastation etched into every line. For a moment, I forgot about my anger and suspicion, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "There are options," Dr. Rao Patel continued, outlining various fertility treatments and their success rates. But I barely heard her. My mind was racing. If Rodney couldn't father children, then how? "We'll need some time to process this," I heard myself say, standing abruptly. "Thank you, doctor." The drive home was tense, Rodney gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. When we finally pulled into our driveway, he turned to me, his eyes red-rimmed. "Jenna, I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I know how much you wanted children." I swallowed hard, torn between comforting him and confronting him. "It's not your fault, Rodney. These things happen." He nodded, then surprised me by pulling me into a fierce hug. "I love you," he murmured into my hair. "We'll get through this together." For a moment, I let myself believe him, but as we entered the house, reality came crashing back. The private investigator's preliminary report, the suspicious phone calls, the late nights at the office, it all pointed to an affair. And now, with this new information, "I need some air," I mumbled, heading for the back porch. Once outside, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed my mother. "Mom?" I whispered when she answered. "I need you." An hour later, I sat at my mother's kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold in front of me, as I recounted everything. The fertility clinic results, my suspicions about Rodney's affair, and the gnawing fear that had taken root in my gut. "Oh, sweetheart," Mom sighed, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm so sorry you're going through this." "What do I do, Mom?" I asked, feeling lost. "If Rodney can't have children and he's having an affair—" Mom's eyes narrowed. "You think this other woman might be pregnant?" The possibility hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I nodded, unable to voice the fear aloud. "Listen to me, Jenna," Mom said, her voice firm. "You need to get all the facts before you do anything rash. Wait for the full report from the investigator. And in the meantime, keep your eyes and ears open." I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "You're right. I need to be smart about this." As I drove home that evening, my mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. I'd play the role of the supportive wife, comforting Rodney through this fertility crisis. But behind the scenes, I'd be gathering evidence, preparing for whatever bombshell might be coming my way. Pulling into the driveway, I noticed Rodney's car was gone. A text message blinked on my phone. "Working late, don't wait up." I smiled grimly. Game on, Rodney. Game on. The manila envelope sat on my kitchen table like a ticking time bomb. Frank Hawkins had called earlier, his gruff voice tinged with sympathy. "Got the full report, Mrs. Lane. It's, well, you should see for yourself." My hands trembled as I reached for the envelope. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out the contents, a stack of photos and a detailed written report. My heart pounded as I flipped through the images. Rodney, arm around a young blonde woman outside a cozy Italian restaurant. Rodney and the same woman kissing passionately in a park. Rodney helping her into his car, his hand lingering on her lower back. I felt bile rise in my throat as I scanned the report. The woman's name was Carla Thompson, 28 years old, a junior executive at Rodney's company. They'd been meeting regularly for months, often during late nights at the office or business trips. The world spun around me as the full weight of Rodney's betrayal crashed down. I stumbled to the bathroom, barely making it before I emptied the contents of my stomach. As I rinsed my mouth, I caught sight of my reflection. Pale, shaken, eyes brimming with unshed tears. "No," I said firmly to my reflection. "You will not break for him." I marched back to the kitchen, snatching up my phone to call Mom. She answered on the first ring. "It's true," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The investigator confirmed everything. Mom's sharp intake of breath crackled through the line. "Oh, Jenna, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. What are you going to do?" I paused, considering. "I'm going to divorce him, Mom, but first, I need to be smart about this." We talked strategy for the next hour. By the time we hung up, I had a plan forming. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Rodney. "Heading out for a business trip. Back in 3 days. Love you?" I snorted. Business trip, indeed. More like a romantic getaway with his mistress. But this time, his lie was exactly what I needed. Over the next 3 days, I was a whirlwind of activity. I contacted a divorce lawyer, gathering all our financial documents. I reached out to old colleagues, subtly putting out feelers for job opportunities, and I started packing, carefully selecting the items that meant the most to me. On the third day, as I was sorting through some old photos, I came across our wedding album. Tears pricked my eyes as I flipped through the pages, remembering the hope and love I'd felt that day. How could Rodney throw all of this away? The sound of a car in the driveway jolted me from my reverie. Rodney was home early. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to hide the evidence of my plans. "Jenna?" Rodney called as he entered the house. "I'm home." I plastered on a smile and went to greet him. "Welcome back, honey. How was your trip?" Rodney's eyes darted away guiltily. "Oh, you know, same old boring meetings." As he rambled on about fictitious client dinners, I studied him. The man I'd loved, the man I'd given up my career for, he was a stranger to me now. "Actually, Rodney," I interrupted, my heart pounding. "We need to talk." He frowned, noticing my serious tone. "What's wrong?" A deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. "I know about Carla," I said quietly. Rodney's face drained of color. "Jenna, I can explain," but I held up a hand, silencing him. "Save it. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with finality. As I watched shock and panic flicker across Rodney's face, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The worst had happened, and I was still standing. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it head on. My hands shook as I smoothed down my blazer, staring at my reflection in the mirror. It had been years since I'd worn anything but comfortable housewife attire. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, determined, fierce, ready to reclaim her life. "You've got this, Jenna," I whispered to myself, grabbing my portfolio and heading out the door. The small accounting firm, Greenwood & Associates, was a far cry from my former corporate glory days. But it was a start. As I sat in the waiting room, my mind raced with a mixture of excitement and terror. Could I really do this? Jump back into the workforce after years of being a housewife? "Mrs. Lane?" A kind-faced woman appeared. "Mr. Greenwood will see you now." The interview was a blur of questions about my past experience, my skills, and the gap in my resume. I explained my situation as diplomatically as possible, leaving out the sordid details of Rodney's betrayal. "Well, Mrs. Lane," Mr. Greenwood said, leaning back in his chair, "your experience is impressive, but I'll be honest. That gap in your employment is concerning." My heart sank, but I refused to give up. "Mr. Greenwood, I understand your concern, but I can assure you my skills haven't diminished. In fact, managing a household budget and investments has only sharpened my financial acumen. Give me a chance, and I'll prove my worth." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, Mrs. Lane, we'll start you on a probationary period. Welcome to the team." Relief and joy washed over me as I shook his hand. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret this." As I left the office, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Rodney. "Where are you? We need to talk about the divorce." Reality came crashing back. I had a job now, but I was still married to a cheater, still living in our shared home. It was time to make my final move. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with plans. When I arrived, Rodney was waiting, his face a mask of false contrition. "Jenna, please," he began. "Can't we work this out? I made a mistake, but I love you." I held up a hand, silencing him. "Save it, Rodney. I'm done listening to your lies." His expression hardened. "Fine. If that's how you want to play it, we'll let the lawyers handle everything. But don't expect to get much in the settlement. You haven't worked in years, remember?" A small, satisfied smile played at my lips. "Actually, Rodney, I just got a job. And as for the settlement, I think you'll find I'm entitled to quite a bit." The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the savings I've been managing, the investments I've made. Oh, and let's not forget about our new house. I think I'll be keeping that." Rodney sputtered, his composure cracking. "You can't do this." "Watch me," I said, my voice steel. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some packing to do." I brushed past him, heading upstairs to our bedroom. As I pulled out my suitcases, a strange mix of emotions washed over me. Grief for the life I was leaving behind, excitement for the future ahead, and a burning desire for justice. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. "How did it go, sweetheart?" I took a deep breath, looking around the room that had been my prison for so long. "It's done, Mom. I got the job and I'm leaving Rodney tonight." There was a pause, then Mom's voice came through, filled with pride and determination. "That's my girl. I'm on my way to help you pack. It's time to start your new life, Jenna." As I hung up, I caught sight of myself in the mirror again. This time, I recognized the woman staring back at me. Strong, resilient, ready to face whatever came next. Let Rodney have his affair. I had a whole new life waiting for me, and I was ready to seize it with both hands. The front door slammed open, jolting me from my packing. Rodney's voice boomed through the house. "Jenna, where are you?" I froze, my heart pounding. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was meant to be gone before he returned from his business trip. Steeling myself, I descended the stairs. The sight that greeted me in the living room knocked the wind out of me. Rodney stood there, his arm wrapped possessively around a young blonde woman. Carla, I presumed. Her hand rested on a slightly swollen belly. "Well, well," Rodney sneered. "Looks like the little housewife is trying to run away." I straightened my spine, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm not running, Rodney. I'm leaving. There's a difference." Carla giggled, the sound grating on my nerves. "Oh, honey," she cooed. "Did you really think you could just walk away after everything Rodney's done for you?" Rage bubbled up inside me. "Everything he's done for me? You mean like cheating on me? Lying to me? Making me give up my career?" Rodney's face darkened. "That's enough, Jenna. We're here to settle this like adults. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, even though I'd been expecting them. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Let's talk terms. Rodney's lips curled into a smug smile. It's simple. You'll get a modest alimony. After all, I've been the breadwinner all these years. You should be grateful for anything you get. I bit back a laugh. If only he knew. Oh, and one more thing, Carla chimed in, her hand caressing her belly. We'll be needing the house. For the baby, you understand. The room spun around me. A baby. The one thing Rodney and I could never have. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. You can't be serious, I whispered. Rodney shrugged. It is what it is, Jenna. Carla and I are starting a family. You had your chance. Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration, anger, and hurt came pouring out. My chance? You mean in the years I spent supporting you, managing our home, investing our money? The career I gave up because you insisted on having a traditional wife? And now you waltz in here with your pregnant mistress and expect me to just roll over? Rodney's face flushed with anger. Watch it, Jenna. Remember who holds the purse strings here. I laughed then, a sharp, bitter sound. Oh, Rodney, you have no idea, do you? Confusion flickered across his face. What are you talking about? I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. I'm talking about the fact that I've been managing our finances for years. Those investments you never bothered to look at, they've tripled in value. That little savings account, it's not so little anymore. Rodney's jaw dropped. Carla looked between us, her smug expression faltering. And as for the house, I continued, I think you'll find that I'm entitled to half of everything, including that. So no, you won't be moving your little mistress in here. You're bluffing, Rodney sputtered. I smiled, feeling a surge of power. Am I? Why don't we let the lawyers sort it out? I'm sure they'll be very interested in how you've been misappropriating company funds to finance your affair. The color drained from Rodney's face. You wouldn't dare. Try me, I said, my voice steel. For a moment we stood there, the air crackling with tension. Then Rodney grabbed Carla's arm. We're leaving. This isn't over, Jenna. As the door slammed behind them, I sank onto the couch, my legs shaking. I'd done it. I'd stood up to Rodney, to Carla, to the life that had been suffocating me for years. But as the adrenaline faded, fear crept in. Rodney wouldn't go down without a fight. And now, with a baby on the way, the stakes were higher than ever. I reached for my phone, dialing my mother's number. Mom, I said when she answered, my voice breaking. I need your help. It's time to finish this. The conference room felt suffocating as I sat across from Rodney and his shark of a lawyer. My own attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Gloria, sat beside me, her presence a comforting anchor in the storm. Let's get this over with, Rodney growled, his eyes never meeting mine. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the battle ahead. Fine. Let's talk about the house first. Rodney's lawyer leaned forward, a predatory gleam in his eye. Mr. Lane is willing to be generous. He'll allow you to stay in the house for 6 months. Get back on your feet. I couldn't help but laugh, the sound brittle and harsh. Get back on my feet. That's rich coming from you, Rodney. Tell me, how's Carla enjoying my home? Rodney's face flushed red. Leave her out of this. Gentlemen, Gloria interjected smoothly. Let's focus on the facts. The house was purchased with joint funds, and Mrs. Lane has been managing the household finances. She's entitled to her fair share. Rodney's lawyer scoffed. Fair share? She hasn't worked in years. What could she possibly contribute? I felt a surge of anger, but Gloria's hand on my arm kept me grounded. Actually, she said, sliding a folder across the table, Mrs. Lane has been quite busy. These are records of all the investments and savings she's managed over the years. The room fell silent as Rodney and his lawyer pored over the documents. I watched Rodney's face pale as he realized just how much I'd been doing behind the scenes. This can't be right, he stammered. Oh, it's right, I said, my voice steady. And there's more. I want the house, Rodney. Not just for 6 months. For good. His head snapped up, eyes blazing. You can't be serious. What about Carla? The baby? The mention of their child sent a sharp pain through my heart. But I pushed it aside. Your infidelity and your new family are not my concern. I've spent years investing in our future, and I'm not walking away with nothing. Rodney's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Rodney waved him off. He spat. Take the damn house, but don't think you're getting anything else. I exchanged a glance with Gloria, who nodded encouragingly. Actually, Rodney, there's one more thing. I want half of everything. including your company stocks. The color drained from Rodney's face. You can't touch those. They're in my name. Gloria cleared her throat. Actually, Mr. Lane, given the length of your marriage and Mrs. Lane's contributions to the household, she's entitled to an equitable distribution of all marital assets, including your stocks. Rodney leapt to his feet, his chair clattering to the floor. This is insane. I won't let you ruin me. I stood slowly, meeting his gaze. Ruin you? Like you ruined our marriage? Our future? Face it, Rodney. You underestimated me, and now you're paying the price. For a moment, I thought he might lunge across the table at me, but then something in his eyes changed. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a cold, calculating look that sent chills down my spine. You want to play hardball, Jenna? Fine, but remember, I know things about you, too. Things that could make your life very difficult. My heart raced, but I refused to show fear. Is that a threat, Rodney? He smiled, a cruel twist of his lips. Let's call it a promise. You push me too far, and I'll make sure you regret it. As Rodney stormed out of the room, his lawyer scrambling to follow, I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. Gloria squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. You did well, Jenna. But this isn't over yet. Are you ready for what comes next? I closed my eyes, thinking of everything I'd been through, everything still to come. When I opened them again, I felt a new resolve stealing my spine. I'm ready, I said. Whatever Rodney throws at me, I can handle it. It's time to finish this, once and for all. The doorbell rang, its chime echoing through the empty house. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my blazer before opening the door. Rodney stood there, a shadow of the man I once loved, his face haggard and eyes bloodshot. Come to beg for the house back? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He pushed past me, stumbling into the foyer. You ruined me, Jenna. Are you happy now? I closed the door, turning to face him. Ruined you? What are you talking about? Rodney laughed bitterly. Don't play dumb. The company demoted me, sent me to some backwater regional office, all because of your little stunt with the divorce proceedings. A pang of guilt hit me, but I pushed it aside. I didn't do anything except stand up for myself, Rodney. Your choices led you here. He whirled on me, eyes blazing. My choices? What about yours? You were supposed to be a wife, not some corporate shark. The old Jenna might have flinched at his words, but not anymore. I was both, Rodney. I managed our home and our finances. I made smart investments while you were busy with your affair. Don't blame me for your failings. Rodney's face crumpled. How did you do it? How did you outsmart me? I sighed, suddenly feeling very tired. It wasn't about outsmarting you, Rodney. I just paid attention. I learned. I planned for our future while you planned for a different future, didn't you? He sank onto the stairs, head in his hands. What am I supposed to do now? Carla left me. The baby. It wasn't even mine. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. All this pain, all this betrayal, for a lie. I'm sorry, Rodney, but that's not my problem anymore. He looked up at me, eyes pleading. Can't we start over? I made a mistake, but we had something good once, didn't we? For a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd married, but then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the years of putting my dreams on hold. No, Rodney, we can't go back. It's time for both of us to move forward. I reached into my pocket, pulling out an envelope. Here, this is the profit from selling the house. Half of it is yours, as we agreed. Rodney stared at the envelope, then back at me. You sold the house? But I never wanted the house, Rodney. I wanted what it represented, our future, but that future is gone now. It's time for a new one. He took the envelope with trembling hands. What will you do now? I smiled, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I'm going to live, Rodney. I've got a new job, new goals. I'm going to be the woman I always wanted to be, not just someone's wife. Rodney stood slowly, looking around the empty house one last time. I really messed up, didn't I? We both did, I said softly. But it's not too late to start over, for either of us. As I watched Rodney walk out of the house, out of my life, for the last time I felt a mix of sadness and exhilaration. The past few months had been a whirlwind of pain, anger, and revelation. But standing there in the empty foyer of the house we once shared, I realized something profound. I was free. Free from the lies, the expectations, the stifling role I'd forced myself into. Free to be Jenna Lane, not just Mrs. Rodney Lane. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. All packed and ready? You sure about this? I smiled, typing back a quick response. Absolutely. Time for a new adventure. As I locked the door behind me, I took one last look at the house. It had been the stage for so much drama, so much heartache. But it had also been the crucible that forged me into the woman I was now, stronger, wiser, and ready to take on the world. I climbed into my packed car, the open road stretching out before me. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, that uncertainty felt thrilling rather than terrifying. Goodbye, Rodney, I whispered, putting the car in drive. Hello, life. As I pulled away from the curb, I felt a surge of excitement. The road ahead might be bumpy, but I was ready for whatever came next. After all, I was Jenna Lane, survivor, fighter, and architect of my own destiny, and my story was just beginning. I smoothed my skirt and took a deep breath, steeling myself for another one of Cecilia's impromptu visits. The doorbell chimed, and I plastered on a smile before opening the door. Laura, thank goodness you're home. Cecilia burst in, her designer purse swinging wildly. I'm in such a pickle, and I didn't know who else to turn to. I bit back a sigh. What's wrong this time, Cecilia? She collapsed dramatically onto my couch. It's the mortgage. I'm behind again, and they're threatening foreclosure. I just need a little help to tide me over. I perched on the edge of an armchair, my patience wearing thin. Cecilia, we've been through this before. Ethan and I can't keep bailing you out. But your family? She wailed. What am I supposed to do? Before I could respond, my cell phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and felt a wave of relief. I'm sorry, Cecilia, but I need to take this. It's my father. I stepped into the kitchen, grateful for the interruption. Hi, Dad. How are you feeling? Laura, sweetheart. My father's voice was uncharacteristically serious. I need you to come over. There's something important we need to discuss. A chill ran down my spine. Is everything okay? Just come as soon as you can, he said, then hung up. I returned to the living room, where Cecilia was rifling through her purse. I'm sorry, but I have to go. My father needs me. Cecilia's head snapped up. But what about my situation? We'll talk later, I said firmly, ushering her towards the door. I really have to go. As I drove to my father's house, my mind raced. What could be so urgent? Dad had always been the picture of health, but lately he'd seemed more tired than usual. I pulled into the driveway and hurried inside. Dad? Where are you? In here, Laura, he called from the study. I found him sitting behind his desk, looking older than I'd ever seen him. What's going on, Dad? You're scaring me. He gestured for me to sit. I'm afraid I have some bad news, sweetheart. I've been to see Dr. Jameson, and, well, it's not good. My heart dropped. What do you mean? I have cancer, Laura, and it's advanced. They're giving me 6 months, maybe a year. The world tilted on its axis. No, I whispered. There must be some mistake. We'll get a second opinion, try different treatments. Dad reached across the desk and took my hand. I've already done all that. It's time to face facts. But that's not why I called you here. I blinked back tears. What do you mean? He pulled out a thick folder. I need to get my affairs in order, and there are some things you need to know. I've made some investments over the years, properties and such. I want to make sure you're taken care of after I'm gone. Dad, stop, I pleaded. I don't want to talk about this. We have to, Laura. You need to be prepared. As he started explaining about bank accounts and real estate holdings, my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Where are you? Cecilia's upset. What happened? I ignored it, trying to focus on my father's words. But my mind was reeling. How could this be happening? And how was I going to tell Ethan? Dad must have sensed my distraction. We can go over the details later. For now, just know that everything's taken care of. You won't have to worry. I nodded numbly, still struggling to process it all. As I stood to leave, Dad pulled me into a tight hug. We'll get through this, sweetheart, he murmured. Together. I clung to him, wishing I could freeze this moment and make time stand still. But as I pulled away, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Driving home, I felt like I was in a fog. How could I face Ethan and Cecilia with this news? How could I face anyone? As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Cecilia's car still parked out front. My heart sank. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready for any of it. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked towards the house, bracing myself for whatever came next. The day of Dad's funeral dawned gray and somber, matching my mood perfectly. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my black dress, when Ethan appeared behind me. "You ready?" he asked, his hand on my shoulder. I nodded, not trusting my voice. As we drove to the church, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The service was a blur of tears and whispered condolences. I barely registered the words of the eulogy, focusing instead on the framed photo of Dad next to his casket. He looked so alive, so vibrant. How could he be gone? As we gathered at the cemetery, Cecilia sidled up to me. "Laura, I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, her voice dripping with sympathy. "Your father was such a generous man. I'm sure he made sure you were well taken care of." I stiffened, shocked by her brazenness. Before I could respond, Ethan pulled me away. "Not now," he muttered. Back at the house, I retreated to Dad's study, needing a moment alone. I ran my fingers over his desk, remembering our last conversation. The folder he'd shown me was still there, tucked away in a drawer. A knock at the door startled me. It was Mr. Jameson, Dad's lawyer. "Laura, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there are some matters we need to discuss," he said gently. I nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "What is it?" He pulled out a thick envelope. "Your father's will." He was very specific about his wishes. As Mr. Jameson began reading, I felt a mix of emotions wash over me. Dad had left me everything. The house, his savings, even a few properties I didn't know he owned. "There's one more thing," Mr. Jameson said, handing me a sealed letter. "Your father wanted you to have this privately." I took it with trembling hands, but before I could open it, the door burst open. Ethan and Cecilia stood there, their eyes wide. "What's going on?" Ethan demanded. Mr. Jameson stood. "I was just going over Harold's will with Laura, if you'll excuse us." "No," Cecilia interrupted. "We're family. We should hear this too." I felt a surge of anger. "This is private, Cecilia. Please leave." Ethan stepped forward. "Laura, don't you think we should discuss this as a family? After all, what affects you affects me too." I stared at him, suddenly seeing him in a new light. "What exactly are you implying, Ethan?" Before he could answer, Cecilia chimed in. "We're just concerned, Laura. You've been through so much. You shouldn't have to deal with all this alone." I stood up, clutching Dad's letter to my chest. "I'm not alone. I have my father's memory and his wishes to guide me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need some time to myself." I brushed past them, ignoring their protests. In the sanctuary of my bedroom, I finally opened Dad's letter with shaking hands. "My dearest Laura," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But I want you to know that I've made arrangements to protect you and your inheritance. Trust your instincts, sweetheart. Not everyone has your best interests at heart." Tears blurred my vision as I read on. Dad had suspected that Ethan and Cecilia might try to take advantage of the situation. He'd set up trusts and legal safeguards to ensure that his legacy remained mine alone. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Laura?" It was Ethan. "We need to talk about the will." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. As I reached for the doorknob, I realized that the battle for my father's legacy and my own future was just beginning. "Coming," I called out, tucking the letter safely away. Whatever happened next, I knew I had to stay strong, for Dad and for myself. The incessant ringing of the doorbell jolted me awake. I glanced at the clock. 7:30 a.m.? Who could it be at this hour? Ethan was already gone, having left early for a business meeting. I threw on a robe and hurried downstairs, only to find Cecilia on my doorstep, looking frazzled. "Laura, thank goodness you're home," she exclaimed, barging past me. "I'm in dire straits. The bank is threatening to repossess my car." I sighed, closing the door. "Cecilia, it's barely morning. Couldn't this wait?" She whirled around, eyes wide. "Wait, Laura, I could lose my car today. I need your help. Just a small loan to tide me over." The audacity of her request so soon after Dad's funeral made my blood boil. "Cecilia, I'm still grieving. I can't deal with your financial problems right now." "But you have all that money now," she pressed. "Surely you can spare some for family?" I felt a surge of anger. "That's enough. My inheritance is not your personal piggy bank. I think you should leave." Cecilia's face hardened. "I see how it is. You get a windfall and suddenly you're too good for family. Ethan will hear about this." As I watched her storm out, I realized the peace I'd hoped for after Dad's passing was slipping further away. Later that afternoon, as I sorted through Dad's belongings, my phone buzzed. It was an email from my old high school announcing an upcoming reunion. I hesitated, then decided to RSVP. Maybe a night out would do me good. Just then, Ethan walked in, looking tired. "Hey," he said, kissing my cheek. "How was your day?" I debated whether to mention Cecilia's visit, but decided against it. "Fine. Just going through some of Dad's things. How was your meeting?" He shrugged, loosening his tie. Same old, same old. "Listen, I was thinking we should talk about the inheritance. Maybe consider investing some of it." I felt my guard go up. "I'm not ready to make any decisions yet, Ethan. It's too soon." He frowned. "Laura, we can't just sit on that kind of money. We need to be smart about this." "We," I echoed. "Dad left it to me, Ethan. I'll decide what to do with it when I'm ready." The tension in the room was palpable. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me. "We'll discuss this later. I have to take this call." As he hurried out, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Why was he so interested in my inheritance? The next morning, I woke to find Ethan already gone again. There was a note on the kitchen counter. "Early meeting. Don't wait up tonight." Feeling restless, I decided to visit one of the properties Dad had left me, a small apartment building across town. As I pulled up, I noticed a familiar car parked outside. Cecilia's. Confused, I made my way to the building's office. The door was ajar, and I could hear voices inside. "She's being so stubborn," Cecilia was saying. "We need to find a way to convince her to share the inheritance." "Patience," a male voice replied. It took me a moment to recognize it as Ethan's. "We'll get what's ours. Just stick to the plan." I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. Ethan and Cecilia were plotting against me? How long had this been going on? As I turned to leave, my foot caught on a loose floorboard. The resulting creak seemed to echo through the hallway. "Did you hear that?" Cecilia's voice was sharp with alarm. I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall. Footsteps approached the door. "Hello?" Ethan called out. "Is someone there?" My heart pounding, I realized I had a choice to make. Confront them now, or retreat and plan my next move carefully. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. I smoothed my dress nervously as I entered the high school gymnasium. The reunion was in full swing, a sea of familiar yet changed faces. I'd come here hoping for a distraction from the mess at home, but now I felt overwhelmed. "Laura? Laura Thompson, is that you?" I turned to see a vaguely familiar face. "It's Laura Prescott now, but yes, I'm sorry, I don't." "Peter Caldwell," he said, grinning widely. "We had chemistry together. Well, the class, not, you know." I forced a polite smile, memories flooding back. Peter had always been a bit intense. "Of course, Peter. How are you?" "Oh, I'm great," he said, edging closer. "But wow, look at you. You haven't aged a day." I took a step back, feeling uncomfortable. "That's kind of you to say. If you'll excuse me, I need to." "Wait," Peter said, grabbing my arm. "I've always regretted not telling you how I felt back then. I had such a crush on you, Laura." I gently but firmly removed his hand. "Peter, that was a long time ago. I'm married now." His eyes narrowed. "Married? To who?" "Ethan Prescott," I said, scanning the room for an escape route. Peter's face darkened. "Prescott? As in Cecilia Prescott's brother?" I froze. "You know Cecilia?" He laughed bitterly. "Oh, I know her all right. She's been stringing me along for months, always needing favors, but now I see what's really going on." My heart raced. "What do you mean?" Peter leaned in, his breath hot on my ear. "Your husband and his sister are planning something, Laura, and it involves you." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. "You're lying. Why should I believe you?" "Because I can prove it," he said, pulling out his phone. "Cecilia's been careless, left some interesting texts on my phone when she borrowed it." With shaking hands, I took the phone. What I saw made my blood run cold. Messages between Cecilia and Ethan discussing ways to access my inheritance, plans to manipulate me, to push me to make rash decisions. "This can't be real," I whispered. Peter's eyes gleamed with a mix of sympathy and something else. Excitement? "Oh, it's real, all right. And there's more where that came from." I handed the phone back, feeling sick. "Why are you showing me this?" He shrugged. "Maybe I still have a soft spot for you, or maybe I'm just tired of being Cecilia's puppet. Either way, you deserve to know." I nodded numbly, my mind racing. What was I going to do with this information? Peter touched my arm again. "Listen, Laura, I can help you. We could team up, get back at them both. What do you say?" I stared at him, suddenly seeing the situation clearly. Peter wasn't my savior, he was just another player in this twisted game, but he had given me valuable information, whether he meant to or not. Thank you for telling me, Peter, I said carefully, but I need to handle this on my own. His face fell. But Laura. No, I said firmly, this is my fight. Please don't contact me again. As I walked away, my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Where are you? We need to talk about the inheritance. It's important. I took a deep breath, making a decision. It was time to stop reacting and start taking control. I would play along for now, gather more evidence. And then, when the time was right, I would confront them all. I texted back, on my way home. You're right. We have a lot to discuss. As I left the reunion, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. The game had changed, and now I knew the rules. It was time to start playing to win. I stepped out of my office building, exhausted after a long day of work. As I fumbled for my car keys, a familiar voice made me freeze. Laura, fancy seeing you here. I turned slowly, my heart sinking. Peter stood there, grinning as if we were old friends. Peter, what are you doing here? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shrugged, stepping closer. I was in the neighborhood, thought I'd say hi. How did you know where I work? I demanded, alarm bells ringing in my head. Oh, I have my ways, he said with a wink. Listen, I've been thinking about our conversation at the reunion. I really think we should talk more about Ethan and Cecilia. I backed away, clutching my purse tightly. I told you, I'm handling it myself. Please leave me alone. His face darkened. You're making a mistake, Laura. You need me. Before I could respond, a coworker walked by, giving us a curious look. I forced a smile and turned back to Peter. I have to go. Don't come here again. As I drove home, my mind raced. How had Peter found me, and what would he do next? The next morning, I woke to find Ethan already gone. There was a note on the kitchen counter. Early meeting. Don't wait up tonight. I sighed, realizing how common these early meetings had become. As I sipped my coffee, movement outside caught my eye. I peered through the window and nearly dropped my mug. Peter was standing across the street, staring at our house. My hands shaking, I called Ethan. It went straight to voicemail. Ethan, call me as soon as you get this. It's urgent. I paced the living room, debating what to do. Should I call the police? But what would I say? That my husband's sister's ex-boyfriend was stalking me because of some convoluted inheritance scheme? A knock at the door made me jump. I approached cautiously, relief washing over me when I saw it was just the mailman. But as I opened the door, Peter appeared behind him. Special delivery, Peter said with a smirk, pushing past me into the house. Get out, I shouted, reaching for my phone. I'm calling the police. Peter held up his hands. Wait, I have proof of what Ethan and Cecilia are planning. Real proof this time. Despite my better judgment, I hesitated. What are you talking about? He pulled out a USB drive. Everything's on here. Bank statements, emails, recorded conversations. They're planning to have you declared mentally unfit, Laura, to take control of your inheritance. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's impossible. Ethan wouldn't. See for yourself, Peter said, offering me the drive. My hand trembled as I reached for it. Just then, I heard a key in the lock. Ethan's voice called out, Laura? Whose car is that out front? Peter's eyes widened. He shoved the USB drive into my hand and bolted for the back door. I quickly slipped the drive into my pocket as Ethan entered. Laura, what's going on? Ethan asked, looking around suspiciously. I took a deep breath, making a split-second decision. Nothing, honey. Just got a bit of a fright from a door-to-door salesman. Everything's fine. Ethan relaxed slightly, but I could see doubt in his eyes. All right. Listen, I was thinking we should have dinner with Cecilia tonight to discuss some family matters. I nodded, my mind racing. Sure, that sounds great. As Ethan headed upstairs to change, I clutched the USB drive in my pocket. I had a choice to make. Trust Peter's evidence and confront Ethan and Cecilia? Or play along and try to uncover the truth myself? One thing was certain, tonight's dinner would change everything. And I had to be ready. The doorbell rang, and I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Cecilia's visit was no surprise. Ethan had arranged this family dinner, after all. But the tension in the air was palpable as I opened the door. Laura, darling, Cecilia exclaimed, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She breezed past me, Ethan following close behind. As we settled in the living room, I couldn't help but notice the furtive glances Ethan and Cecilia exchanged. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, feeling the outline of the USB drive Peter had given me. So, Laura, Cecilia began, her voice sickly sweet. "How have you been coping? It must be so difficult, dealing with your grief and all this newfound responsibility." I forced a smile. "I'm managing, thank you. Dad prepared me well." Ethan cleared his throat. "Speaking of which, Laura, we really need to discuss the inheritance. I've been thinking." "Actually," I interrupted, my heart racing, "I have something I'd like to discuss first." They both stared at me, surprise evident on their faces. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone, bringing up the photos Peter had sent me. Pictures of Ethan and Cecilia meeting in secret, looking far too cozy. "Care to explain these?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. The color drained from Ethan's face. Cecilia let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, those? That's nothing, just a family meeting." "Stop lying," I snapped. "I know what you've been planning, trying to have me declared mentally unfit? Really?" Ethan stood up, his face a mask of anger. "Where did you get those photos? Have you been spying on us?" "That's rich, coming from you," I retorted. "I'm not the one plotting behind my spouse's back." Cecilia's demeanor changed in an instant. "You ungrateful bitch," she hissed. "After everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean constantly begging for money? Trying to manipulate me out of my inheritance?" Ethan stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "You have no idea what you're talking about. We were trying to protect you, to make sure you didn't squander everything your father left you." "By having me declared incompetent?" I shot back. "Some protection." Suddenly Ethan's expression shifted. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "You want to play hardball, Laura? Fine, let's talk about your little rendezvous with Peter." My blood ran cold. "What?" He pulled out his phone, showing me a series of photos. Peter and me at the reunion, outside my office, even at our front door. "Looks like I'm not the only one with secrets," Ethan sneered. "That's not what it looks like," I stammered. "Peter's been stalking me. I was trying to handle it on my own." "Save it," Cecilia interjected. "We have all the evidence we need. How do you think it'll look to a judge when we show them these? A grieving widow, acting erratically, meeting strange men." The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. They'd set me up. Peter, the photos, the USB drive, it was all part of their plan. "You won't get away with this," I said, my voice shaking. Ethan's laugh was cold. "We already have. Face it, Laura. You're out of your depth. Sign over control of the inheritance now, and we can avoid a messy public legal battle." I looked between them, these people I'd once considered family, now revealed as vultures circling their prey. In that moment, I felt more alone than ever. But then I remembered my father's words from his letter. "Trust your instincts, sweetheart. Not everyone has your best interests at heart." I straightened my spine, meeting their gazes head-on. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly. "This ends now, but not the way you think." I pulled out the USB drive, holding it up. "You're not the only ones with evidence, and unlike your fabricated photos, what's on here is real. So here's what's going to happen." As I laid out my terms, I saw the confidence drain from their faces. The game had changed, and for the first time I held all the cards. The battle for my father's legacy and my own future had reached its tipping point, and I was ready to fight. The morning after my confrontation with Ethan and Cecilia, I woke to an empty house and a text message from an unknown number. "Meet me at Riverside Park, 1 p.m. Come alone, Peter." My instincts screamed danger, but I knew I needed answers. I arrived at the park early, scanning the area for any sign of Ethan or Cecilia. Peter was already there, pacing nervously by the fountain. "Laura," he called out, relief evident in his voice. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I kept my distance, eyeing him warily. "Start talking, Peter. What's your role in all this?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely distressed. "I'm so sorry, Laura. I never meant for it to go this far. Cecilia, she blackmailed me. Said she'd ruin me if I didn't help set you up." "Why should I believe you?" I demanded. Peter pulled out his phone. "Because I recorded everything, every conversation, every plan they made. I couldn't go through with it anymore." As he played the recordings, my world tilted on its axis. Ethan's voice, cold and calculating, discussing ways to manipulate me. Cecilia, gleefully planning how they'd spend my inheritance once I was out of the picture. "Oh, God," I whispered, feeling sick. "How long has this been going on?" "Months," Peter admitted. "Since before your father passed. They've been planning this for a long time, Laura." I sank onto a nearby bench, my mind reeling. Why come clean now? Peter sat beside me, keeping a respectful distance, because I realized how wrong it was, and because I really did have feelings for you back in school. I couldn't be part of destroying your life. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Where are you? We need to talk. Come home now. I showed Peter the message, my heart racing. What do I do? He hesitated, then said, Go, act like nothing's changed. I'll send you copies of everything I have. Use it to protect yourself. I nodded, standing on shaky legs. Thank you, Peter. I'm sorry I misjudged you. As I drove home, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions, betrayal, anger, fear, but underneath it all, a steely determination was forming. I wouldn't be their victim any longer. Ethan was waiting when I walked in, his face a mask of concern. Where have you been? I've been worried sick. I forced a smile. Just needed some air to clear my head after last night. He nodded, reaching for my hand. I fought the urge to recoil. I'm sorry about how things went. We all said things we didn't mean. But I think I have a solution. Oh? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Ethan led me to the dining room where Cecilia was waiting with a stack of papers. My stomach dropped. We've drawn up some documents, Ethan explained, just to help manage the inheritance, for your own protection, of course. I glanced at the papers, recognizing power of attorney forms. They were really going through with it. I don't know, I said, feigning uncertainty. This is a big decision. Can I have some time to think about it? Cecilia's smile was razor sharp. Of course, dear, but don't take too long. We wouldn't want things to get messy. As they talked, outlining their plans for my father's legacy, I felt a calm settle over me. They thought they had won, but they had no idea what was coming. My phone buzzed quietly. Peter's files had arrived. I excused myself, retreating to the bathroom. As I scrolled through the damning evidence, a plan began to form. I looked at myself in the mirror, seeing a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Game on, I whispered to my reflection. Returning to the dining room, I plastered on a smile. All right, I said, picking up the pen. Let's talk about these documents. Ethan and Cecilia exchanged triumphant glances, unaware that their carefully laid plans were about to come crashing down around them. The final act was about to begin, and I was ready to reclaim my life and my father's legacy, once and for all. I stood in the living room of Ethan's parents' house, my heart pounding but my resolve unshakable. Around me, the faces of the Prescott family, including Ethan and Cecilia, ranged from confused to suspicious. Laura, dear, Ethan's mother began, what's this all about? Why have you called us all here? I took a deep breath. I have something important to share with all of you, something that will change everything. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. Laura, whatever you're thinking. No, I cut him off firmly. You've done enough talking. Now it's my turn. I pulled out my tablet and connected it to the TV. What you're about to see and hear might shock you, but I assure you, it's all true. As I played the recordings Peter had given me, the room fell into stunned silence. Ethan and Cecilia's voices filled the air, detailing their plans to manipulate me, to steal my inheritance, to have me declared incompetent. Ethan's father stood up, his face red with anger. What is the meaning of this? It means, I said, my voice steady, that your son and daughter have been plotting against me since before my father died. They've lied, cheated, and manipulated everyone in this room. Cecilia lunged forward. You bitch! You have no proof. I have every proof, I interrupted, pulling out a stack of documents. Bank statements showing mysterious transfers, emails detailing your plans, even a recorded confession from Peter about how you blackmailed him into helping you. The room erupted into chaos. Ethan's mother was sobbing, his father shouting. Cecilia was screaming denials, while Ethan stood frozen, his face ashen. I raised my voice above the din. I'm not finished. There's more. I played the final recording, a conversation between Ethan and his mistress, planning their future with my money. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan's father turned to him, his voice shaking with rage. Is this true? Have you brought this disgrace upon our family? Ethan's shoulders slumped in defeat. Dad, I can explain. Get out, his father growled. Both of you. You're no longer welcome in this family. As Ethan and Cecilia were ushered out, hurling accusations and threats, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was over. Ethan's mother approached me, tears in her eyes. Laura, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. I squeezed her hand gently. I know. You're victims in this too. As I prepared to leave, Ethan's father stopped me. What will you do now? I smiled, feeling truly free for the first time in months. I'm going to honor my father's legacy, the way he would have wanted. Driving home, I reflected on the whirlwind of events that had led to this moment. The betrayal, the pain, the fear, but also the strength I'd found within myself. I pulled into my driveway, noticing a familiar figure waiting on the porch. Peter. I heard what happened, he said as I approached. Are you okay? I nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. I am. Thank you for your help, Peter. I couldn't have done this without you. He shifted awkwardly. Laura, I know I messed up before, but I was wondering. I held up a hand, stopping him. Peter, I appreciate everything you've done, but right now I need to focus on myself, on healing. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He nodded, offering a small smile. Of course. Take care of yourself, Laura. As I watched him walk away, I felt the last pieces of my old life falling away. I entered the house, my house now truly mine, and looked around. The rooms that had once felt suffocating now held promise. I picked up a framed photo of my father, tracing his smiling face. I did it, Dad, I whispered. I protected what you built, and I found myself along the way. Setting the photo down, I walked to the window and looked out at the setting sun. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as new opportunities, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face them. Not as a victim, not as someone's wife or daughter, but as Laura, strong, resilient, and finally truly free. The phone trembled in my hand as I dialed Alan's number for the third time. My heart raced, each ring echoing the pounding in my chest. Finally he answered. What is it, Camille? His voice was sharp, irritated. I took a shaky breath. Alan, I can't do this anymore. I feel so alone, even when you're here. It's like I'm living with a stranger. Christ, not this again, he groaned. You're being dramatic. I work hard to provide for us, and this is the thanks I get? Tears stung my eyes. That's not fair. I'm not asking for much, just for you to be present, to care. I do care, Alan snapped. But I can't be at your beck and call every minute. You knew what you were signing up for when you married me. His words hit like a slap. Did I? Because the man I married actually wanted to spend time with me. He didn't treat me like an inconvenience. Oh, for God's sake, Alan muttered. Look, I'm in the middle of something important. We'll talk about this later. We never talk about it later, I said, my voice breaking. That's the whole problem. Camille, you're being ridiculous. Pull yourself together and stop acting like a child. I'll be home when I'm home. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, feeling hollow and numb. How had we gotten here? This wasn't the life I'd imagined when I said I do 5 years ago. A gentle knock on the door startled me. Camille? Are you all right, dear? It was Diane, Alan's mother. I quickly wiped my eyes. I'm fine, Diane. Just a little tired. The door creaked open, and Diane's concerned face appeared. I couldn't help overhearing, Did you have another fight with Alan? I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Diane sighed and sat beside me on the bed. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. My son can be difficult sometimes. That's putting it mildly, I said with a bitter laugh. Diane patted my hand. I know it's not easy living here with me. It's not what you imagined for your marriage. No, Diane, it's not your fault, I assured her. You've been nothing but kind. It's Alan, she finished. I love my son, but I'm not blind to his faults. He takes after his father in some unfortunate ways. I looked at her, surprised by her frankness. I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I'm losing myself in this marriage. Diane's eyes hardened with resolve. Then it's time we did something about it. You deserve better, Camille, and it's high time my son remembered the man he's supposed to be. What do you mean? I asked, a flicker of hope igniting in my chest. I mean, Diane said, squeezing my hand, that it's time we gave Alan a wake-up call, together. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of something other than despair. What did you have in mind? Diane's eyes twinkled with mischief. Well, my dear, let's just say that sometimes a mother knows best how to handle her wayward son. Are you ready to fight for your marriage? I straightened my shoulders, feeling a surge of determination. Yes, I said firmly. I'm ready. As Diane began to outline her plan, my phone buzzed with a text from Alan. Working late, don't wait up. I showed it to Diane, who shook her head in disappointment. Oh, Alan, she murmured. You have no idea what's coming. Little did I know, as Diane and I plotted our next move, that this was just the beginning of a storm that would change all our lives forever. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. The woman looking back at me seemed a stranger, tired eyes, worry lines etched around her mouth. How had I become this person? My mind drifted back to the day I first met Alan. God, he'd been charming then. We were both working on a big marketing campaign, our desks side by side. His quick wit and easy smile had drawn me in like a moth to flame. Earth to Camille, Alan's voice snapped me back to the present. He leaned against the doorframe, impatience written across his face. Are you planning on spending all day in here? We're going to be late for dinner with Mom. I sighed, applying a last swipe of lipstick. I'm ready. Let's go. The drive to Diane's was tense, silence hanging heavy between us. As we pulled into the driveway, Alan turned to me. Try to act normal tonight, okay? Mom doesn't need to hear about our problems. My jaw clenched. Our problems? You mean the fact that you barely acknowledge my existence? Alan's eyes flashed with anger. Not this again. Just behave, all right? Before I could retort, Diane opened the front door, beaming at us. There you are. Come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready. As we stepped inside, the familiar scent of Diane's pot roast filled the air. It was comforting, a reminder of happier times when Alan and I first got married. We'd been so excited to start our life together, to find our own place and build our future. But then Alan had lost his job, and Diane had offered to let us stay with her just until things got back on track. That was 3 years ago. So how are things? Diane asked as we sat down to eat. Her eyes darted between Alan and me, sensing the tension. Fine, Alan said curtly, shoveling food into his mouth. I plastered on a smile. Everything's great, Diane. Thanks for having us over. Diane nodded, unconvinced. You know, I was thinking, it must be hard for you two, still living here after all this time. Have you thought about looking for your own place? Alan's fork clattered against his plate. Mom, we've talked about this. It doesn't make financial sense right now. But surely with both your salaries, Diane began. Drop it, Mom, Alan snapped. We're fine where we are. I stared at my plate, fighting back tears. This wasn't fine. None of this was fine. Actually, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, I've been thinking about that too, Diane. Maybe it is time we found our own place. Alan's head whipped towards me, his eyes blazing. What are you talking about? We can't afford it. We could if we budgeted, I countered, gaining courage. I've been looking at some apartments. Behind my back? Alan's voice rose. Jesus, Camille, do you ever stop nagging? Diane's hand flew to her mouth. Alan, don't speak to your wife that way. But Alan was on a roll now. You want to know why we can't move out, Camille? Because you're terrible with money. Always buying useless crap we don't need. At least here, Mom keeps you in check. The room fell silent. I felt as if I'd been slapped. That's enough, Diane said firmly. Alan, apologize to your wife right now. Alan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. He stormed out, leaving Diane and me staring after him in shock. Oh, Camille, Diane said softly, reaching for my hand. I'm so sorry. I had no idea things were this bad. I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. They flowed freely as I confessed everything. The loneliness, the neglect, the growing chasm between Alan and me. As Diane held me, murmuring words of comfort, my phone buzzed. A text from Alan, don't wait up, staying at a friend's tonight. I showed it to Diane, who shook her head in disbelief. This can't go on, she said, a determined glint in her eye. It's time we did something about my son's behavior. Are you with me? Through my tears, I nodded. Whatever Diane had planned, I was all in. Things had to change, and they had to change now. The morning after our disastrous dinner, I woke to find Alan's side of the bed untouched. My stomach churned as I remembered his text from the night before. Where had he really gone? I trudged downstairs, the smell of coffee guiding me to the kitchen. To my surprise, Diane was already there, bustling around in her floral apron. Good morning, dear, she said, sliding a steaming mug towards me. I thought you could use this. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, grateful for her thoughtfulness. Thanks, Diane. You didn't have to do this. She waved off my gratitude. Nonsense. We're family. Her eyes softened with concern. How are you holding up? I sighed, slumping into a chair. Honestly, I don't know. I feel like I'm drowning, Diane. And Alan, He's not even trying to throw me a lifeline. Diane sat across from me, her weathered hands covering mine. I want you to know something, Camille. No matter what happens with Alan, you'll always have a place here. You're like a daughter to me. Tears pricked my eyes. That means more than you know. Just then, we heard the front door open. Alan stumbled in, looking disheveled and reeking of alcohol. Where have you been? I demanded, anger flaring. He squinted at me, then at Diane. What's she doing here? I live here, remember? Diane's voice was cold. The question is, where were you all night? Alan waved his hand dismissively. Out. Needed to clear my head after that ambush last night. I stood up, fury coursing through me. Ambush? Is that what you call us wanting a normal conversation about our future? Our future is fine, Alan shouted. Why can't you just be happy with what we have? Because what we have isn't a marriage, Alan. It's barely even a roommate situation at this point. Diane stepped between us. Both of you, calm down. This isn't helping anyone. Alan glared at his mother. Stay out of this, Mom. It's none of your business. It became my business when you moved into my house, Diane shot back, and when you started treating your wife like she doesn't matter. Alan's face contorted with rage. Oh, so you're taking her side now? Perfect. Just perfect. He stormed upstairs, leaving Diane and me in stunned silence. I'm so sorry, I whispered, mortified by his behavior. Diane shook her head. Don't you dare apologize for him. This isn't your fault, Camille. As we cleaned up the kitchen, trying to process what had just happened, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. He doesn't deserve you. You should leave him. I showed it to Diane, my hands shaking. Who could this be? Her brow furrowed. I don't know, but it's unsettling. Block the number for now. Throughout the day, Alan remained locked in our bedroom. Diane and I tiptoed around the house, speaking in hushed tones about what to do next. I think, Diane said carefully, it might be time to consider your options, Camille. This situation isn't healthy for anyone. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. I know. I never thought it would come to this. As evening fell, Alan finally emerged. He looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot. Camille, he said, his voice hoarse. Can we talk? Alone? Diane squeezed my hand reassuringly before leaving us. Alan sat heavily on the couch. I've been thinking. Maybe you're right, about us needing our own place. Hope fluttered in my chest. Really? You mean it? He nodded. Yeah, I found an apartment. We can go see it tomorrow if you want. I was about to agree when my phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. Don't trust him. He's lying to you. My blood ran cold. I looked up at Alan, searching his face for any sign of deception. What was really going on here? Camille? Alan prompted. What do you say? I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. Sure. Let's check it out. As Alan left the room, looking relieved, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. Who was sending these messages? And more importantly, were they right about Alan? The apartment Alan showed me was perfect, spacious, bright, and far from his mother's watchful eye. As we walked through the rooms, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the fresh start we needed. So what do you think? Alan asked, a rare smile on his face. I nodded, trying to match his enthusiasm. It's lovely. When can we move in? His smile faltered. Well, there's just one thing. The deposit's a bit steep. I was thinking, maybe we could borrow from Mom? And just like that, the bubble burst. Are you kidding me, Alan? The whole point was to be independent. He held up his hands defensively. It's just temporary. We'll pay her back. I shook my head, disappointment settling in my chest. No, if we do this, we do it on our own. The drive home was tense. As we pulled into Diane's driveway, I made a decision. Alan, I want to have a baby. He nearly choked. What? Where is this coming from? I'm not getting any younger, I said, my heart racing. And I thought maybe it would bring us closer. Alan's face hardened. Camille, we can barely afford an apartment. How the hell are we supposed to afford a kid? We'd make it work, I insisted. Lots of couples do. He laughed bitterly. Yeah, couples who actually want kids. I told you when we got married, I'm not interested in being a father. His words hit me like a physical blow, but I thought you might change your mind. Well, I haven't, he snapped, and frankly, I'm not sure you'd be cut out for motherhood anyway. You can barely take care of yourself. Tears stung my eyes as I got out of the car. That's not fair, Alan. I've been taking care of both of us for years while I what? He challenged, following me inside. While I work my ass off to provide for us? Provide what? I shouted back. We live with your mother. We have nothing of our own. Diane appeared in the hallway, concern etched on her face. What's going on? Alan threw up his hands. Camille's lost her mind. She wants a baby now. Is that so terrible? Diane asked softly. It is when she's not fit to be a mother, Alan spat. The room fell silent. I stared at my husband, a stranger wearing the face of the man I'd once loved. How can you say that to me? He didn't answer, just stormed off to our room, slamming the door behind him. Diane approached me cautiously. Camille, honey. But I couldn't bear her sympathy right now. I grabbed my keys and ran out the door, ignoring her calls behind me. I drove aimlessly, tears blurring my vision. How had my life come to this? When had Alan become so cruel? My phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. He'll never give you what you want, but I know someone who will. Curiosity overrode my better judgment. I replied, Who are you? The response came quickly. Someone who knows Alan better than you think. Meet me at Rosewood Park in an hour if you want the truth. My hands shook as I stared at the message. This was crazy. Meeting a stranger based on cryptic texts. But then I thought of Alan's cold eyes, his cutting words. What did I have to lose? I turned the car toward Rosewood Park, my mind racing. Who would be waiting for me there? And what truth could they possibly reveal that would make sense of the mess my life had become? As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw a lone figure sitting on a bench near the pond. A woman, her face obscured by large sunglasses. My heart pounded as I got out of the car. This was it, the moment that would change everything. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward her, ready to face whatever came next. I approached the woman on the bench, my heart pounding. As I got closer, she removed her sunglasses, revealing a face I'd never seen before but somehow felt familiar. Camille, she said, her voice tinged with sympathy. I'm Linda. The name hit me like a slap. Linda, the woman from the mysterious texts. I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. Who are you? How do you know Alan? She took a deep breath. I was Alan's girlfriend. The world tilted on its axis. Girlfriend? But he's married. To me. Linda's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, Camille. I didn't know he was married when we met. By the time I found out, I was already in love with him. My mind reeled. Alan, my husband, had a girlfriend? How long? I managed to choke out. Almost a year, she whispered. A year. While I'd been struggling to save our marriage, begging for scraps of attention, Alan had been building a life with someone else. Why are you telling me this? I asked, anger rising to replace the shock. Linda looked away. Because I'm pregnant. And Alan, he wants me to get rid of it. The words hung in the air between us. I thought of my conversation with Alan just hours ago, his cruel dismissal of my desire for a family. And now this? I don't know what to do, Linda continued. I thought you deserved to know the truth, and I hoped maybe you could help me decide what to do next. I laughed bitterly. Help you? You've been sleeping with my husband for a year, and you want my help? She flinched. I know I have no right to ask, but I'm scared, Camille. Alan's not the man I thought he was. Join the club, I muttered. We sat in silence for a moment, two women betrayed by the same man. Finally, I stood up. I need to go. I can't process this right now. Linda nodded, handing me a piece of paper. My number, in case you want to talk more. I took it without thinking and walked away, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. How could Alan do this to me, to us, and a baby, the very thing he'd told me we couldn't have? When I got back to Diane's house, I found her waiting up for me, worry etched on her face. Camille, where have you been? I've been so worried. One look at her kind, concerned face, and I broke down. Through sobs, I told her everything, the texts, meeting Linda, Alan's betrayal. Diane held me close, her own tears falling. Oh, my dear girl, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Alan could be so cruel. As my sobs subsided, a strange calm settled over me. I looked at Diane, seeing not just my mother-in-law, but a true friend. What do I do now? Diane's eyes hardened with resolve. Now we fight back. Alan can't treat you this way and get away with it. But how? I asked, feeling lost. A slow smile spread across Diane's face. I have an idea. It's a bit unconventional, but it might be just what we need to give Alan the wake-up call he deserves. As Diane outlined her plan, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. It was risky, potentially disastrous, but after everything I'd learned, I was ready to take that risk. Okay, I said, straightening my shoulders. Let's do it. Diane squeezed my hand. That's my girl. Alan won't know what hit him. As we stayed up late into the night, plotting our next move, I realized something. In losing my husband, I'd gained something far more valuable, a true ally in Diane. Whatever came next, I wouldn't face it alone. Tomorrow, we'd set our plan in motion, and Alan, he was about to learn that hell hath no fury like two women scorned. My hands trembled as I dialed Alan's number, Diane's plan echoing in my mind. One phone call to set everything in motion. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. What is it, Camille? Alan's irritated voice crackled through the speaker. I swallowed hard, forcing a tremor into my voice. Alan, I need your help. It's your mother. Mom? What about her? She's been different lately, cruel. I think she wants me out of the house. There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. Camille, don't start this again. Mom's been nothing but kind to you. I pressed on, my heart racing. No, Alan, you don't understand. Yesterday, she threatened me, said if I didn't leave, she'd make my life hell. That doesn't sound like Mom at all, Alan said, his tone dismissive. You're probably just misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. I injected real anger into my voice now. Your mother told me I was worthless, that you'd be better off without me. How am I supposed to misunderstand that? Alan's voice hardened. Look, I'm sure if we all sit down and talk. Talk? I nearly shouted. Alan, I'm scared to be in this house. Don't you care at all? There was a long silence, then quietly. Of course I care, Camille, but what do you want me to do? It's her house. My blood ran cold. Even faced with the idea of his mother threatening his wife, Alan couldn't muster any real concern. Diane had been right. He truly didn't care anymore. I want you to stand up for me, I said, my voice breaking. To choose me, for once. Alan sighed again. Camille, Suddenly I heard a muffled female voice in the background. Babe, who are you talking to? My heart stopped. That wasn't Diane's voice. No one, Alan said quickly, his voice distant as if he'd moved the phone away. Just work stuff. I'll be there in a minute. Ice flooded my veins. Linda. He was Linda. Alan, I said, my voice deadly calm now. Who's there with you? What? No one. Look, Camille, I've got to go. We'll talk about this mom thing later, okay? The line went dead. I stared at the phone, shock and rage warring inside me. Diane appeared in the doorway, her face etched with concern. Camille, what happened? I told her everything, Alan's callous response to our fabricated story and the damning evidence of the female voice. Diane's face hardened. That's it, no more games. It's time we confronted him directly. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. You're right, but first there's something I need to do. I pulled out the piece of paper Linda had given me and dialed the number. Hello? Linda's hesitant voice answered. Linda, it's Camille. We need to talk. In person. Now. There was a pause, then a shaky exhale. Okay, where? I gave her the address of a nearby cafe. And Linda, bring any proof you have of your relationship with Alan. Text, photos, anything. Okay, but why? Because, I said, my voice steel, we're going to take that bastard down. As I hung up, I caught Diane's approving nod. That's my girl, she said softly. I grabbed my keys, a newfound determination coursing through me. I'll be back soon, and then we're going to confront Alan once and for all. As I drove to meet Linda, my mind raced with possibilities. This was it, the moment everything would change. Alan's web of lies was about to come crashing down around him, and I was done being the victim. It was time to fight back. My hands shook as I spread the damning evidence across Diane's kitchen table. Photos, text messages, even hotel receipts. Linda had provided it all. Each piece was a knife to my heart, but also fuel for the fire burning inside me. Diane's face was a mask of controlled fury as she examined the proof of her son's betrayal. That miserable lying snake, she muttered. I nodded, my throat tight. We have to confront him, tonight. Just then my phone buzzed. A text from Alan. On my way home, we need to talk about Mom. Diane and I exchanged glances. This was it. Are you ready? She asked, squeezing my hand. I took a deep breath. As I'll ever be. We heard Alan's key in the lock, and my heart raced. He walked in, his face clouding when he saw us both waiting. What's going on? He asked warily. I stood, my voice steadier than I felt. We know everything, Alan. About Linda, about the baby. The color drained from his face. Camille, I can explain. Explain? Diane's voice cracked like a whip. Explain how you've been lying to your wife to me for over a year? Alan's eyes darted between us. Mom, this doesn't concern you. The hell it doesn't, Diane shouted. You brought that woman into my house, Alan. You made a fool of all of us. I stepped forward, laying out the evidence on the coffee table. No more lies, Alan. It's over. He stared at the photos, the messages, his face a mix of shock and anger. You went through my things? You talked to Linda? Don't you dare try to turn this around on us, I spat. You're the one who betrayed your vows, who's been living a double life. Alan's face hardened. Fine. You want the truth? I'm in love with Linda. I have been for months. She understands me in a way you never could, Camille. His words hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to let him see how much they hurt. And the baby? Were you just going to abandon your child? He flinched. That was complicated. I told Linda we couldn't keep it. It would ruin everything. Diane made a sound of disgust. I didn't raise you to be this kind of man, Alan, to throw away your family, your responsibilities. You didn't raise me at all, Alan shouted. You were too busy trying to control every aspect of my life. That's why we're still living in this damn house. I watched mother and son face off, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. But I wasn't about to let Alan deflect from his actions. Enough, I yelled. This isn't about your childhood issues, Alan. This is about the fact that you've been lying to me, cheating on me for months, and now you have a child on the way that you're trying to abandon. Alan's face twisted with rage. What do you want from me, Camille? An apology? Fine, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I ever married you. I'm sorry I wasted years of my life trying to make this work when we both know it's been over for a long time. His words hung in the air, sharp and final. I felt something inside me break, but also something else, a sense of release. You're right about one thing, I said quietly. It is over. I want a divorce. Alan blinked, clearly not expecting this. What? I turned to Diane, who nodded in support. I'm leaving, Alan. Tonight, and I'm taking half of everything we own. You can't do that, he sputtered. Watch me, I said, my voice steel. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. As I walked out of the room to pack my bags, I heard Diane's voice, cold and final. And you, my son, will be leaving too. This house is no longer your home. I climbed the stairs, my heart pounding. This was it, the end of my marriage, but also the beginning of something new. Whatever came next, I knew I wouldn't face it alone. I had Diane, and more importantly, I had myself. It was time to reclaim my life on my own terms. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Diane's guest room, where I'd spent the night after the explosive confrontation with Alan. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the divorce papers in my hands. This was it, the final step in reclaiming my life. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Diane entered, her face etched with concern and determination. Are you ready, dear? I nodded, standing up, as I'll ever be. We made our way downstairs where Alan waited, his face a mask of anger and defeat. The tension in the room was palpable as we all sat around the kitchen table. Before we do this, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I want to know why, Alan. Why wasn't I enough? Alan's jaw clenched. It wasn't about you, Camille. I felt trapped in this house, in this life. Linda was an escape. An escape? Diane's voice cracked like a whip. You destroyed your marriage for an escape? Alan's eyes flashed. You're one to talk, Mom. You've been suffocating me for years, always hovering, always judging. I watched as mother and son glared at each other, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. But I wasn't about to let Alan deflect from his actions. Enough, I said firmly. This isn't about your mother, Alan. This is about the choices you made, the lies you told, the family you're abandoning. Alan's face crumpled. I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't want to hurt anyone. But you did, I said softly. You hurt all of us, and now we all have to live with the consequences. I slid the divorce papers across the table. Alan stared at them for a long moment before picking up the pen. As he signed, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was over. Really, truly over. What happens now? Alan asked, his voice small. Diane spoke up, her tone resolute. Now you leave. This house is no longer your home. I'm signing it over to Camille. Alan's head snapped up. What, Mom, you can't. I can and I am, Diane cut him off. Camille needs a fresh start, and so do I. We're going to sell this place and split the proceeds. Then we're both moving on, together. I looked at Diane in shock. We hadn't discussed this. Diane, I can't accept. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. You can, and you will. You're the daughter I always wanted, Camille. Let me do this for you, for us. Tears welled in my eyes as I nodded, overwhelmed by her generosity and love. Alan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. So that's it? You're both just cutting me out of your lives? I met his gaze steadily. You cut yourself out, Alan, but it doesn't have to be forever. If you get help, if you make amends, especially to Linda and your child, maybe someday we can have a relationship again. But for now, yes, this is goodbye. As Alan walked out the door, I felt a chapter of my life closing. But instead of sadness, I felt hope blooming in my chest. Diane and I spent the rest of the day making plans. We'd sell the house, find new places to live, close to each other, but not too close. We talked about trips we wanted to take, hobbies we wanted to pursue. For the first time in years, I felt excited about the future. That night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Diane turned to me with a smile. You know, Camille, I always wanted a daughter. I just never expected to find her quite like this. I leaned my head on her shoulder, feeling truly at peace. I always wanted a mother who understood me. Looks like we both got our wish. As the sky turned from gold to purple, I realized that sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about choice. It's about love. And Diane and I, we'd chosen each other. We'd weathered the storm together and come out stronger on the other side. Whatever the future held, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't alone anymore, and that was worth everything.
Why are you here? Don't tell me a high school graduate and poor person is trying to get treated by a doctor? My ex-husband chuckled to himself as if he found his own words amusing. Unmoved by his disdainful behavior, I remained calm. It's none of your business. What a cold woman you are. Just so you know, even at a university hospital, there's no cure for being a high school graduate or poor. Unable to find humor in his poor joke, I didn't laugh. Just then, I noticed a nurse rushing towards us. She waved her hand when she saw us. It's an emergency. We have a patient in critical condition, unconscious. Please come immediately. My name is Mandy. I'm the eldest of 4 siblings and lost my father when I was in elementary school. After his death, my mother raised us alone. But the debt he left made it difficult for her, despite her hard work. I was forced to work at a local factory to help support my family. I wanted my younger siblings to follow their desired paths without financial hardship. So I worked relentlessly. The turning point came when I was 18. After being invited to dinner several times by a supervisor, Steese, from my department, he proposed a relationship. And I also had a favorable impression of him. Our relationship progressed smoothly, and on my 20th birthday, I accepted his marriage proposal. I had told Steve about my educational background from the beginning of our relationship. But he always said, education doesn't matter when you love someone, and strived to treat me as an equal. Although he was older, he never acted superior and always respected me. However, that was only a temporary dream. Over time, Steve increasingly looked down on me. Hey, show some gratitude. Who do you think is making it possible for you to live like this? His disgruntled voice made me tense up. After our marriage, at his strong insistence, I quit the factory to become a full-time housewife. I had planned to continue working even after marriage, but he wanted me to stay home, preparing meals and keeping the house clean every day. I was worried about reducing the amount I could send to my mother. But I couldn't bring myself to resist, so I quit my job. Yet, Steve looked down on me as an unemployed who didn't work and only cost money. Steve, I want to work too. He scoffed at my feeble attempt at protest. Few companies would hire a high school graduate. Just obey me and keep quiet doing the housework. His cold voice echoed. Quitting my job as he demanded was a mistake. The allowance he gave me was gradually decreasing. If I said I needed more money, he would surely blame my management skills. Knowing this, I couldn't speak up and covered the shortfall with my own savings. While watching my husband drink idly in the evening, I thought vaguely about divorce. Fortunately, I'm still young. If I divorced Steve, I could still have children with someone else. He probably doesn't know how much I'm suffering. He must think I'm a stupid woman who doesn't listen to him. Slowly feeling my heart growing cold, I pondered without being able to take any action. As I watched my savings dwindle and endured Steve's contemptuous behavior and our poor marital relationship, I realized this couldn't continue. I repeatedly tried to discuss things with him, but each time, he avoided conversation with excuses like being tired from work or having plans to go out. Eventually, he even started saying, "I don't even want to talk to someone with such a low education." I had reached my limit. After finishing dinner and putting things away, I took out the divorce papers hidden in a drawer. My section was already filled out. All that was left was to bring up divorce to him. Moistening my dried lips, I summoned the courage to speak to him as he watched TV. "Steve, I have something important to discuss." Hearing my tense voice, Steve turned around lazily. Holding out the thin piece of paper, I faced him directly. "I want a divorce." Steve's eyebrows twitched. I braced myself for yelling. However, contrary to my expectation, no shout came. Cautiously checking his reaction, Steve quietly clenched his fists, his face turning red with anger. Yet, he didn't approach me. Perhaps thinking that doing anything more would mean defeat. Trying desperately to control his swirling anger. After a long silence, he growled in a low voice. "A high school graduate like you." His fists trembled more intensely, his angry gaze piercing me. His cold look was chilling, and I instinctively stepped back. "Do you really think you, a high school graduate, can defy me? You don't have any right to initiate a divorce." My husband's voice was loud and intimidating as he vented his anger. Still, I couldn't back down. I had suffered enough at his hands. Holding back the urge to cry, I glared back at him. Perhaps surprised by my unexpected strength, he momentarily looked taken aback. Clutching the divorce papers in one hand, I raised my smartphone towards him. On the screen were messages between him and a female subordinate, which was clear evidence of his affair. "While you can't even provide me with enough for basic living expenses, it seems you've been quite generous to her. If you don't need me anymore, then let's get a divorce and set me free." For the first time, my husband was at a loss for words. He apparently didn't know I had evidence of his affair. He must have been overly confident that I would never find out. After a while, unable to find an excuse, and realizing he couldn't talk his way out of it, he laughed defiantly. "It's exhausting to live with a stupid woman. I need a break." Without any remorse, he admitted to the affair and turned his back on me as if the conversation was over. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, and I circled around to turn off the TV, bringing silence back to the living room. His sullen face turned towards me. I steadied my trembling legs and presented the divorce papers to him again. "All I'm asking is for you to sign this. Please." I couldn't understand why he was so reluctant to divorce. He looked down on me, saying he was tired of living with me and cheated with another woman, yet he clung to this marriage. If he insisted I had no right to ask for a divorce, I was willing to let him initiate it. Public perception and pride didn't matter to me if it meant getting away from him. "If you really want a divorce that badly," he said with a sigh as he reached for the divorce papers, Then return all the living expenses I've paid you. If you can do that, I might agree to the divorce. That's impossible. Can't do it, huh? Well, that makes sense since you're a jobless and high school graduate. He chuckled deeply, finding something amusing in his own cruelty. Over the 3 years of our marriage, even by the lowest estimates, he had given me over $50,000 for living expenses. Although I hadn't received much lately, it was still a substantial amount that my savings couldn't cover. Almost all of it went to rent and groceries, and I had little to no discretionary money. Despite my best efforts to save, I often had to dip into my own savings to make ends meet. I couldn't accept his absurd demand, and I felt darkness closing in. He seemed to enjoy laying these impossible conditions on me, watching me struggle. Then, a small flame of resolve lit up within me. I wanted to prove him wrong. My determination solidified. I'll pay it all back, I declared firmly, meeting his gaze. He half smiled, clearly thinking I couldn't possibly manage it. But that was exactly why I had to do it. Can I have some time, though? And I'd like to settle the divorce first. You wouldn't want to keep living with a woman who might take your assets, right? He seemed uncertain of my intentions for a moment, but then hastily signed the divorce papers without much thought and handed them back to me. It's just an empty promise you can't keep. Don't spread this around. It would ruin my reputation. With those selfish words, our marriage abruptly came to an end. But I felt no despair. I was fortunate to be only 23 years old. As long as you're young, you can do anything, my mother always said. I quickly packed my bags and left the house without a second glance at my husband. Dragging my suitcase, I boarded an express bus home. The next time I would see my husband, everything would be dramatically different. I reaffirmed my resolve as I watched the urban landscape flow by outside the window. 12 years later, I found myself standing bewildered in the lobby of a university hospital. It was my first visit, and the vast grounds had me completely lost. I tried to ask for directions, but every staff member seemed too busy to care about a lost visitor. I spun the map in my hands, trying to figure out where I was and where I needed to go. Could it be Mandy? Suddenly, a man's voice called my name from behind. I turned around, startled, to find a man who looked to be approaching middle age. I felt I had seen his face somewhere before but couldn't place it. Excuse me, but who might you be? As I asked apologetically, the man sighed deeply and looked down at me. Oh, come on, does a high school graduate also have bad memories? It's unimaginable to forget someone you were married to. Hearing that, I took a hard look at the man's face. Memories slowly started coming back to me, particularly his condescending gaze. Steve. Having been addressed by name, Steve settled into a chair in the lobby with a satisfied air. Prompted by him, I somewhat reluctantly took the seat next to him and observed his face again. His hair had thinned, and his face had aged significantly. Most notably, the trim figure he once had was now flabby and his belly protruded. 12 years had indeed changed him. You recognized me quite well, didn't you? Well, of course, your face hasn't changed at all, and you're still ugly. His casual insult didn't faze me. I was too weary to make a fuss about it. My lack of reaction seemed to disappoint him, and he scratched his head disinterestedly, letting an awkward silence hang between us. What did he want by speaking to me? Surely, he couldn't possibly remember the promise from 12 years ago. He adjusted his graying hair and then looked at me with a sly grin. Why are you here? Don't tell me a high school graduate. And poor person is trying to get treated by a doctor? He laughed at his own joke. I remained unaffected by his demeaning behavior. It's none of your business. What a cold woman. Just so you know, even university hospitals don't have a cure for being a high school graduate or poor. I couldn't muster a laugh at his poor joke. Just then, I noticed a nurse rushing toward us, waving her hand. Mandy, we have an emergency. The patient is unconscious and in critical condition. Please come right away. I immediately stood up and took a lab coat from the nurse. Steve stared at me in disbelief. Thank you for your support on your first day after transferring. There are no other doctors available right now. The nurse ushered me away quickly, leaving no time to pay any mind to Steve. I handed him the map I'd been holding, as I didn't have time to dispose of it properly. He watched me, eyes wide, unable to grasp the situation. As you see, I became a doctor. After dealing with the emergency, I was due to enter the consultation room. It was still before the official start of my shift. But wandering the hospital alone, I'd likely get lost again. I reviewed the medical chart and gasped when I saw who it was. Steve, too, widened his eyes in disbelief upon seeing me in the examination room. According to the chart, Steve was suffering from a heart condition and had been referred to the university hospital. I immediately composed myself and returned to my duties. Steve, seemingly dissatisfied, did not attempt to hide his sour expression. Any questions before you leave? I asked routinely. How did a high school graduate become a doctor? He muttered under his breath. The nurse behind me looked at him with a puzzled expression. I hesitated for a moment before responding. My father was a doctor. It's not that I was not intelligent enough to attend university. I remembered my father vaguely. He was always busy with work, rarely home, and squandered most of what he earned on alcohol and hostess clubs, even accruing debts. Yet, I was grateful for his passion for education, without which I would not have become a doctor. I had always believed, since I was aware, that I would be a doctor like him. I never struggled academically through elementary and middle school, even in high school, and my mother was always pleased, confident I could become a doctor. After my father passed away, I had to start working. But I continued to study diligently, and eventually applied to medical school. But you couldn't have afforded university. My mother saved all the money I sent home. There was also a scholarship program. A scholarship? You. His demeaning tone almost got to me. But I quickly regained my composure and glanced at his worn-out face. You always underestimated me as a stupid high school graduate. But you just never noticed. His face contorted with displeasure as he glared at me. A nurse whispered from behind that it was almost time. I put away the chart and prepared to call the next patient. Then, as if remembering something, I looked back at him. Oh, as for the living expenses you wanted me to repay, I can pay them back now, and double the amount. I earn more than you do now. His face flushed a deep red. I had chosen my words carefully to crush his excessive pride. Although his anger visibly bubbled, he managed only to stand up. With a loud noise in the examination room, which was a public space visited by other staff. What is this, a quack doctor? I'll file a complaint against this hospital. With that disjointed parting shot, he stormed out of the examination room. Left alone, I exhaled deeply, releasing the fatigue. Despite the weariness, I felt oddly refreshed. Eventually, Steve chose to seek treatment at another hospital. But he was advised there as well to return to the university hospital where I worked. When he came back, He looked uncomfortable. After our divorce, the woman he had an affair with had left him, and rumors of his infidelity had spread throughout his office. The affair and our divorce had become public, forcing him to resign. He had been abandoned by both women, damaging his pride, increasing his drinking and smoking, which had led to his heart condition. I felt a slight pity as he faced a major surgery. But considering how he had treated me during our marriage, I couldn't find it in me to forgive him. Of course, his treatment was a separate matter, and I carried out my duties professionally. We still see each other occasionally during his checkups. At one point, he even suggested we try again, but I politely declined. I have no intention of marrying anytime soon and am happily living with my family. It might sound strange for me to say, but as a doctor, my reputation is quite good, and I earn enough to support my mother and siblings. Amidst my busy but fulfilling days, I sometimes reflect on that fruitless marriage.